The air over the Bavarian Alps was still in the spring of 1945, the war's dying days, when the convoy appeared along the winding mountain road. Trucks caked in mud struggled uphill beneath the weight of heavy crates. The men inside wore the gray uniforms of the Wehrmacht, though their insignia had been hastily removed. They didn't speak much. Orders were clear. No questions, no delays. Only the driver of the lead truck, a man named Lieutenant Karl Weiss, knew what they were transporting. Or at least, he thought he did. The wooden crates were marked with red wax seals and strange inventory codes from the Reichsbank. Some bore the faint stenciled words Kulturwerke, cultural works. But inside, hidden beneath false bottoms, were gold bars, gemstones, priceless paintings, and silver ingots taken from across occupied Europe. It was the Reich's last attempt to hide its fortune before the Allies closed in. Karl had joined the army in 1938, believing in duty, not ideology. By 1945, he was exhausted, disillusioned, and haunted by what he had seen in the East. When his commanding officer, Major Rainer Vogel, told him this mission would secure Germany's future, he didn't believe it. He had seen too many men die for illusions. But he obeyed orders. His convoy carried the remnants of a collapsing empire. Wealth looted from museums, banks, and even the homes of those who would never return. Night fell as they reached the valley floor. The convoy stopped near an abandoned salt mine outside the village of Altusay. Guards posted along the road waved them in. The mine entrance gaped like a dark wound in the mountainside, lit only by the flicker of lamps. Inside, men in dusty uniforms were already stacking crates among marble statues, religious icons, and rolled canvases. The air smelled of damp earth and gun oil. A colonel oversaw the operation, shouting orders in clipped tones. Karl parked his truck, climbed out, and watched as soldiers disappeared into the darkness with their cargo. Somewhere deeper inside, he heard the echo of voices reciting numbers, cataloging, measuring, sealing. He followed the sound until he reached a chamber carved into the rock. There, under flickering lamps, he saw what looked like a cathedral built underground. Rows of art treasures stacked like relics, Rembrandts beside Vermeers, chalices beside gold bars stamped with Swiss mint marks. Karl felt a chill. "What happens to it all?" he asked quietly. The colonel glanced at him, eyes hollow with fatigue. "It belongs to Germany," he said, "until Germany returns." But Germany would not return. Within weeks, the Reich would be gone. When the Allies arrived in May, the war was over. The salt mine was found sealed behind charges that had failed to detonate. Inside, American soldiers stumbled upon the greatest treasure trove of stolen art and gold in history. More than 6,500 paintings, thousands of sculptures, crates of gold, and even entire church altars. It became known as one of the Monuments Men discoveries, a triumph of cultural salvation amid devastation. But what the Americans found at Altusay was only a fraction of what had been hidden. Other convoys, like Karl's, had vanished entirely. In the confusion of surrender, entire shipments of Reichsbank gold disappeared without trace. Some said they were sunk in mountain lakes. Others whispered they had been smuggled through Switzerland, traded for new identities and quiet lives abroad. The Allied command formed special units to track the missing assets. Teams of intelligence officers, art historians, and soldiers who followed rumors through ruined cities and forests. In the summer of 1946, one such investigator, Captain William Hayes of the U.S. Army's Monuments, Fine Arts, and Archives section, stood beside the shores of Lake Toplitz. The lake lay deep within a narrow gorge, its water so dark it seemed bottomless. Local villagers spoke of trucks arriving under cover of night, of soldiers loading crates onto rafts and pushing them into the lake before detonating explosives. Divers sent by the Allies had already found fragments of crates and counterfeit British pounds, part of Operation Bernhard, the Nazi plan to destabilize the British economy. but the gold remained elusive. Hayes was a quiet man, methodical, with the tired eyes of someone who had seen too much war. He believed the lake held something more, something the records didn't mention. He spent days examining captured German documents, tracing convoy numbers, and interviewing prisoners. One name kept appearing: Lieutenant Karl Weiss. See-through. Same officer listed on a missing Reichsbank shipment log dated April 29, 1945. Hayes followed the trail through dusty archives and forgotten reports until he found an eyewitness, a former truck mechanic from the convoy now living in Munich. The man told him that their column never reached Altusay. They had been redirected south toward the Alps under Vogel's orders. He said, "We were going to hide something the Americans must never find," the man recalled. Something that would bring Germany back one day. Hayes felt the chill of those words. He requested permission to continue the investigation, but by 1947, the U.S. Army's focus had shifted to Reconstruction and the emerging Cold War. Many treasure hunts were quietly shut down. Files went missing. Leads disappeared into bureaucratic silence. Karl Weiss, meanwhile, had vanished. In 1951, long after the world had moved on, a hiker in the Austrian Alps stumbled upon a rusted truck buried in snow and ice. Inside were skeletal remains in tattered Wehrmacht uniforms, and beneath the floorboards, fragments of gold bars. The find drew international attention, and once again, rumors of the lost gold of the Reich ignited. Some claimed the treasure had been split among SS officers fleeing to South America. Others insisted it was hidden in remote mountain bunkers, guarded by veterans who had sworn oaths of secrecy. A few even whispered that Allied officers themselves had taken their share. Decades passed, but the mystery endured. Treasure hunters descended on alpine valleys with metal detectors and diving gear. They found relics, bones, and rusted vehicles, but never the fortune. Governments opened archives. Documents surfaced describing unaccounted assets and missing cultural property. Still, the truth seemed to slip away like smoke. Even in the 1980s, when technology made deep-water exploration possible, dives into Lake Toplitz continued to uncover crates, counterfeit notes, and Nazi memorabilia, but not the treasure everyone imagined. Some began to believe it had been a myth all along, a fabrication born from war's chaos and the human hunger for mystery. But one file, discovered decades later, told another story. It was a letter dated May 5, 1945, written by Karl Weiss to his wife Anna. It was never delivered. It had been found among declassified U.S. intelligence papers. The ink had faded, but the words were legible. "We are hiding what cannot be surrendered. Reiner says it must never fall into foreign hands. If we fail, it will sleep in the mountains until Germany rises again." Hayes never saw that letter. He died in 1968, still convinced that the treasure was real and that it lay somewhere between Altusay and Lake Toplitz. When divers returned to the area in the 2000s, they found evidence of tunnels leading deeper into the mountains than previously mapped. Some experts now believe a portion of the Reich's gold remains sealed within collapsed mine shafts, entombed beneath tons of rock, preserved by cold and silence. And yet, the legend refuses to die. Locals still tell stories of late-night diggers and mysterious strangers who appear in the valleys each summer. They say that when the fog rolls down from the peaks, you can hear the echo of engines, the sound of trucks that never reached their destination. In the early 1950s, Europe was rebuilding itself on the ashes of its own destruction. The Marshall Plan had poured money into shattered cities, factories were humming again, and new borders had begun to solidify under the long shadow of the Cold War. Yet, in forgotten corners of the Alps, whispers of hidden Nazi gold refused to fade. There were rumors in the beer halls of Salzburg, in the cafes of Munich, in dimly lit hotel bars where veterans drank in silence. Everyone had a story, a cousin who saw the trucks, a friend who helped unload crates, a miner who heard the echoes of engines deep underground. In 1953, one such rumor reached a man named Eric Lang, a former intelligence officer turned journalist. Lang had served with the U.S. Counterintelligence Corps during the occupation, chasing escaped war criminals and tracking missing Reichsbank assets. He'd seen the files, the lists of looted art, the coded ledgers recovered from bunkers. But one report, stamped classified and marked missing shipment, Operation Feuergold, had always stayed with him. It listed 7 trucks, led by Major Rainer Vogel, last seen heading toward the Tauern Mountains in late April 1945. The same convoy Weiss had driven. Lang's curiosity became an obsession. He left his newspaper job in Vienna and began retracing the route the convoy would have taken. He interviewed old farmers who remembered seeing German vehicles driving through mountain passes after the war's official surrender. He visited abandoned tunnels, old Wehrmacht supply depots, and half-collapsed bunkers overgrown with moss. Everywhere he went, he found traces, tire tracks preserved in stone-hard mud, rusted fuel cans stamped with the eagle insignia, fragments of crates with faded inventory numbers. One evening, in a small tavern in Bad Aussee, an old man approached him. His name was Otto Schenk, a retired miner who had worked at the Altossee salt mine. His hands trembled as he lit a cigarette. "You're looking for the gold, aren't you?" he said, smoke curling from his lips. Lang hesitated, then nodded. Otto smiled faintly. "You're not the first, but maybe you'll listen better than the others." He told Lang about a night in May 1945 when he had been forced by SS men to help unload trucks near a disused tunnel entrance several kilometers from the main mine. They worked under lantern light, stacking heavy wooden crates deep inside before blasting the entrance closed. "They said it was for the Führer," Otto whispered. "But when the blasting was done, I heard shouting, then gunfire. In the morning, the soldiers were gone." Lang's heart raced. He pressed Otto for details. The exact location, the markings on the crates, the number of trucks. But the old man only shook his head. "Even if you find it," he said, "it won't bring you peace. Too many ghosts guard that place." Lang left the tavern that night with Otto's rough map drawn on a napkin. It marked a small ravine west of Lake Grundlsee, a place now overgrown and forgotten. Days later, Lang hiked into the mountains with a camera, a compass, and a revolver he carried out of habit. He followed the map through dense forest until he found what looked like an unnatural mound of earth and stone. Digging with his hands, he uncovered a fragment of rusted metal. A truck's fender, the German registration still faintly visible. The site was real. The convoy had been here. Lang spent weeks exploring, documenting everything he found. He sent his notes to a contact in London who worked for a newspaper interested in post-war mysteries. But before the story could be published, Lang vanished. His landlady in Salzburg reported him missing in December 1953. His hotel room was left untouched, his typewriter still loaded with a half-finished page. The local police found nothing. No body, no struggle, only a single torn photograph among his belongings. It showed Lang standing beside a rock face, his hand resting on something barely visible in the shadows, the edge of a steel door set into the mountain. Years later, that photograph would resurface in the archives of the German Federal Intelligence Service, stamped Geheim, secret. It was part of a classified report from 1954 describing unauthorized excavations in the Alpine region involving sensitive wartime materials. The report warned of possible political repercussions if the operation became public. As the decades passed, the legend of the lost Nazi treasure grew. It became a story retold in whispers by treasure hunters and soldiers, by Cold War spies and smugglers. By the 1960s, the CIA and the BND were quietly investigating the possibility that part of the missing gold had been used to fund clandestine networks. rat lines that helped Nazi officers escape to South America. Names like Vogel and Weiss appeared again in declassified intelligence files, connected to rumored bank accounts in Argentina and Brazil. Then, in 1972, a group of amateur divers exploring Lake Grundlsee made a discovery. Buried under several meters of silt, they found the remains of a wooden crate reinforced with steel bands. Inside were rotted canvas sacks containing silver coins, Reichsmarks, all dated before 1945. The coins were later confirmed as genuine. The divers also found a rusted Wehrmacht helmet and, more disturbingly, human bones. The authorities sealed off the area, but the find reignited interest worldwide. Among those drawn back into the story was Anna Weiss, now an elderly woman living in Hamburg. She had never remarried after her husband Karl's disappearance. When she read about the discovery, she wrote a letter to the Austrian authorities claiming that her husband had written to her from the mountains before he died. The letter, she said, mentioned something buried for the future. She enclosed a copy of his final words, the same lines later found in the U.S. archives. "If we fail, it will sleep in the mountains until Germany rises again." Her statement renewed official investigations, though most historians dismissed it as wartime myth. Yet one man took it seriously, a young Austrian historian named Dr. Lucas Bauer, who had recently begun researching the post-war art recovery missions. He visited Anna in Hamburg in 1974, and she showed him an old photograph of Karl standing beside a truck marked with the number V07. Bauer traced the number to military transport records, indicating that V07 was part of a special convoy under Major Vogel, the same convoy listed in Operation Feuergold. Bauer returned to Austria and began his own investigation, combining military archives with aerial reconnaissance photos from 1945. He discovered an anomaly in the mountains near Grundlsee, a section of forest where the ground appeared unnaturally disturbed, as if it had been excavated and refilled. With the help of local guides, he surveyed the site. Beneath layers of soil and stone, they found traces of steel plating and a collapsed tunnel entrance. The breakthrough came one autumn afternoon when Bauer's assistant uncovered a small brass tag engraved with the words Reichsbank Berlin. The artifact matched inventory tags found at the Altusee mine. They were close. As Bauer prepared to excavate further, the Austrian government abruptly intervened. Military police arrived, confiscated his equipment, and declared the area a restricted zone citing unexploded ordnance. The investigation was shut down. Bauer protested publicly, claiming the government was covering up something far larger than missing gold. He died in a car crash 3 months later under suspicious circumstances. And just like that, the trail went cold again. Decades passed. The Cold War tightened its grip on Europe, and memories of the war faded into textbooks and archives. The mountains that had once echoed with gunfire now hosted ski resorts and tourists. Yet, under the snow and silence, the secret remained. In 1991, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, archives that had been sealed for generations began to open. Old intelligence reports, long buried in East German vaults, surfaced. Among them was a set of microfilms labeled Operation Nebelspur, Trail of Fog. They contained intercepted radio messages from 1945 between an SS unit in Austria and a contact in Switzerland. The messages spoke cryptically of cargo secured for the 4th day and departure through the Tauern route. What caught historians' attention, however, was a signature, R. Vogel. One of those historians was Elena Fischer, a researcher at the University of Munich who specialized in Nazi economic history. She had read about the legend of the lost treasure since her student days, but dismissed most of it as post-war myth. Yet the microfilms intrigued her. They confirmed the existence of Major Rainer Vogel and his convoy, proof that Operation Feuergold had been real. Elena began to re-examine everything. She pored over wartime transportation logs, Reichsbank records, and U.S. declassified intelligence reports. In one document, she found a note scribbled by an American officer in 1946. Local sources claim one truck still unaccounted for, possibly diverted to Switzerland. The deeper she dug, the more she realized the story was more than gold. Vogel hadn't just been transporting bullion. Among the crates were files, coded ledgers, and art pieces. Stolen masterpieces the Nazis used to finance their global network after the war. Some were recovered in the Altusay mine, but others vanished. In 1993, Elena received a letter with no return address. Inside was a faded black-and-white photograph, the same one of Eric Lang standing by a steel door, the one that had disappeared from archives decades earlier. On the back, written in German, were the words, "He found it." They never let him tell. It was signed only with the initials AW. Elena's hands trembled as she held the photo. Could it be Anna Weiss, the widow of Karl Weiss, the convoy driver? But Anna had reportedly died in 1985 unless someone wanted her to pick up where others had stopped. She traveled to Austria, following the trail that had consumed men before her. Grundlsee was quiet that spring, its surface like glass reflecting the surrounding peaks. She rented a small cottage and began interviewing locals, including the grandchildren of miners and soldiers who had lived through the war. Some remembered strange stories told by their grandparents, of tunnels sealed by soldiers, of trucks heard late at night, of explosions echoing across the valley when no fighting was recorded. One evening, while reviewing old survey maps, Elena noticed something odd. A section near the lake's northern ridge was marked Restricted Access, Government Property. The records claimed it was a former ammunition storage site, but when she visited the local land office, she discovered the property had been quietly leased in 1955 to a company that no longer existed. The leaseholder's name was Reinhard Vogel, the same as the SS officer. Her pulse quickened. Could Vogel have survived and hidden his identity? There were rumors that many SS officers had assumed new lives after the war, some even aided by Allied intelligence. The Cold War had blurred lines. Men who were once enemies became assets. Elena contacted a retired journalist in Vienna who had once worked on a story about missing Nazi wealth. His name was Michael Kraus, and he remembered the case vividly. "We were told to drop it," he told her. Too many governments had dirty hands. That gold didn't just vanish. It moved through banks, through deals, through wars. Together, they returned to Grundlsee using Bauer's old notes, Lang's photograph, and new ground-penetrating radar borrowed from a university project. After days of scanning, they detected a void beneath the earth, a chamber roughly the size of a small warehouse. It was located directly under the restricted property, once leased to Vogel. They filed a request for archaeological excavation. Days later, the Austrian Ministry of Culture granted approval, but only under supervision from federal authorities. The officials who arrived seemed unusually tense, speaking little, monitoring every move. On the fourth day of digging, as dusk fell over the valley, the workers broke through a layer of rock and uncovered a corroded steel door. The markings on it were unmistakable. A faded swastika and the words Reich Eigentum, property of the Reich. The air that escaped smelled of oil, dust, and time. Inside, they found a narrow tunnel leading into darkness. The walls were lined with timber supports blackened by age. In the first chamber, crates lay stacked like coffins, their wood soft and damp but still intact. On the lid of one, the letters RBB were still visible. Reichsbank, Berlin. The officials ordered the team to halt while military engineers inspected the site. 2 hours later, they emerged pale-faced and silent. The excavation was suspended. The next morning, the entire area was sealed off by Austrian soldiers. Elena and Kraus protested, demanding to know why. But the ministry claimed the site contained hazardous materials and potential explosives. Within days, all access was blocked, and both Elena and Kraus received official warnings to cease their investigation. 3 weeks later, Kraus died suddenly of a heart attack while jogging near his home in Vienna. Elena, now frightened and uncertain who to trust, fled Austria and returned to Munich. Yet, before she left, she smuggled out a few photographs she had taken in the tunnel. Blurry images showing the crates and, behind them, something else. A dark, metallic box marked with a red eagle and a number. V07. It was the truck Karl Weiss had driven. Elena couldn't sleep for weeks. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that steel door, the crates, and the ghostly letters stamped on them. Reichsbank, Berlin. The images haunted her. She had uncovered proof of something enormous, yet it had slipped through her fingers again, swallowed by the same shadows that had hidden it for 80 years. She began to notice strange things. One evening, while leaving her university office, she saw a black car idling across the street. Its engine remained running, but the driver never stepped out. The next morning, her emails to Austrian officials bounced back as undeliverable. Her research access to national archives was revoked without explanation. Someone was closing doors, one by one, but Elena was stubborn. She had inherited that from her father, a war historian who had spent years documenting Nazi looting operations. She dug deeper into the corporate front that had leased the property back in 1955. Alpenbau GmbH. On paper, it was a construction firm dissolved decades ago. But its bank records, once traced through old Swiss archives, led to something astonishing. A Zurich account controlled by a company linked to the Bormann organization. The post-war network believed to have laundered Nazi assets through South America and Europe. The more she found, the clearer it became. The treasure hadn't simply vanished into a cave. It had been moved again and again, through banks, shell companies, and governments that preferred silence over exposure. The crates under Grundlsee were only the leftovers. What had been too heavy, too risky, or too inconvenient to retrieve when the world turned its attention elsewhere. One night, while organizing her files, Elena received an encrypted email from an anonymous address. It contained only a single line. They didn't take everything. Vogel kept one ledger. It's in Argentina. Attached was a scanned passport photo of a man bearing a striking resemblance to the SS officer from 1945. Only older, with a new name, Rainer Voss, born in Buenos Aires. 1951, Elena hesitated for days. Traveling to Argentina meant stepping into a world far beyond academic research. But the pull of truth, the same force that had consumed Lucas Bauer, proved irresistible. She took a leave from her university, told no one, and booked a one-way flight to Buenos Aires. The city was alive with noise, color, and history. A place where ghosts of the past lingered behind every colonial facade. She followed her leads to Bariloche, a lakeside town deep in Patagonia, long rumored to be a haven for exiled Nazis. In a dusty public archive, she found a record of Rainer Voss, who had owned a small logistics company in the 1970s specializing in imports from Europe. He had died in 1984. The same year, the last known shipment from that region to Switzerland disappeared at sea during a storm. Elena's search led her to Voss's old house on the outskirts of town. It had been sold years ago, but the caretaker, an elderly man named Eduardo, remembered him well. "Quiet man," Eduardo said. Always had visitors from Europe. Men in suits. Once soldiers came, took boxes from the basement at night. When Elena asked if anything remained, Eduardo led her to the cellar. The air was thick with dust and the smell of old wood. In a corner behind stacked crates, she found a locked metal box, rusted but still sealed. After forcing it open with a crowbar, she found what she had been chasing for years. A leather-bound ledger, the pages yellowed but legible. Inside were names, numbers, and locations. coded entries corresponding to bank accounts, shipments, and inventory lists. But at the top of the first page, written in careful German script, was a title: Operation Nebelspur, Final Transfer, 1952-1961. The ledger proved everything. Gold, art, jewels, even industrial patents had been moved through shadow networks into companies that survived long after the war ended. Some of those corporations still existed, their names familiar, their wealth enormous. Elena photographed every page. She knew the information was dangerous. Exposing it could shake governments, banks, and billion-dollar enterprises whose roots lay in stolen wartime treasure. That night, she uploaded the digital copies to multiple encrypted drives and mailed them to trusted colleagues across Europe. She had learned from Bauer's fate. This time, no secret would die with her. But the past was not done chasing her. 2 days later, as she prepared to leave Bariloche, her hotel room was searched. Nothing was stolen. But her suitcase was open, her passport moved, and a single item had been left on the desk. It was a coin. A 1943 Reichsmark, polished clean, gleaming under the lamp. She left Argentina the next morning under a false name, her heart pounding as the plane lifted off the runway. Somewhere, someone still wanted this secret buried. Back in Germany, Elena began writing her book, The Lost Gold of the Reich, How the Treasure Never Ended. The manuscript combined history, investigation, and testimony. It read like a thriller, but every word was backed by evidence. Yet before she could publish, she received an offer from an international law firm representing private European interests. They offered her a fortune, enough to retire comfortably. If she agreed to withdraw the book and surrender her research, she refused. Weeks later, her publisher's office was broken into. The manuscript vanished. Elena disappeared soon after. Her friends said she left for Switzerland, fearing for her life. Others claimed she joined a human rights organization investigating war crimes in South America. No one knew for certain. Only one clue surfaced years later: a letter sent anonymously to a historian in Vienna. Inside was a small photograph of Elena standing beside a mountain lake, smiling. On the back, written in her handwriting, were the words, "Some treasures are better left where they were buried, but the truth will always rise." And beneath that, a symbol, a red eagle, and the number V07. The snow fell quietly over the Austrian Alps, thickening the silence that had blanketed the valley for centuries. It was December 2023, nearly 80 years since the war had ended, when another expedition arrived at Grundlsee. But this time, it wasn't led by soldiers or treasure hunters. It was an international archaeology team, sponsored by the European Historical Preservation Council. Among them was Anna Keller, a young historian specializing in post-war art recovery. Anna wasn't there by coincidence. She had grown up hearing whispers about a mysterious woman, a Professor Elena Weiss, who had vanished in South America decades earlier. Her grandmother had been Elena's close friend at the University of Munich, and before her death, she had handed Anna a sealed envelope with strict instructions. Open this only when you are ready to understand what really happened at Grundlsee. Inside had been a single photograph: Elena beside a lake, smiling, and a GPS coordinate scribbled in faint ink. The numbers pointed to a narrow ridge overlooking the southern shore of Grundlsee, just a few kilometers from where Lucas Bauer's excavation had taken place in 1946. Now, standing amid the same misty mountains that had hidden empires and secrets, Anna finally understood what that photo meant. The council's official goal was to document wartime mining tunnels and verify local legends about hidden caches. But Anna's real mission was personal. She wanted to know what Elena had found and why she had vanished. By the second week of digging, they uncovered a small access shaft hidden beneath centuries of rockfall. The entrance was reinforced with steel plates, the kind used by wartime engineers. When they removed the debris and pried open the rusted hatch, a rush of cold, stale air swept upward, air that hadn't touched daylight since 1945. Inside, the tunnel descended deep into the mountain. Their lights revealed faded markings, German script, unit codes, and dates from late 1944. The team moved carefully, their boots echoing on the stone. After nearly 100 meters, the tunnel opened into a large chamber carved by hand. And there, coated in dust and time, stood crates, dozens of them, stacked against the walls, stamped with the insignia of the Reichsbank Berlin. The silence was overwhelming. For a moment, no one moved. History itself seemed to breathe again in that hollow chamber. The crates were opened under supervision of Austrian authorities. Inside, they found what the world had long dismissed as legend: gold bars, neatly stamped with serial numbers, velvet cases containing jewelry, diamonds and watches, bundles of currency, and rolled paintings sealed in waxed paper. Later forensic testing confirmed what historians had only theorized. Several of the paintings matched catalog numbers from the ERR, Einsatzstab Reichsleiter Rosenberg, files. Art looted from Jewish families, museums, and monasteries across Europe. But what astonished everyone was a single crate placed apart from the rest. Inside was a collection of ledgers wrapped in oilcloth. On the first page of one, written in the same precise handwriting as before, was the title, Operation Nebelspur, Annex II. Anna's hands trembled as she turned the page. The handwriting matched the samples from Elena's old notes. It was her. Somehow, Elena had returned to Austria years after disappearing and added her own annotations, cross-referencing shipments, adding coordinates, and marking which caches had been recovered and which were still missing. The ledger contained something else, too. A letter, folded neatly inside. It was dated November 1986, addressed simply, "To whoever finally finds this." It read, "I have spent my life chasing ghosts." The gold, the art, the ledgers, they were never just treasure. They were evidence, proof of how greed, when wrapped in ideology, can survive the end of a war. The treasure did not vanish. It changed hands, names, and purposes. Much of it became the seed capital of companies and governments that still shape our world. If you have found this, remember, not every secret is meant to be destroyed, but every lie must eventually face the light. I hid this record here, not for power or fame, but so that someday someone would see the truth and choose to tell it. It was signed, Elena Weiss. The discovery made headlines around the world. Governments called for investigations. Museums demanded restitution. Families who had lost everything during the war finally began to see justice in motion. Forensic accountants traced gold serial numbers to post-war Swiss accounts, linking them to financial institutions that had quietly profited for decades. But amid the global uproar, Anna stayed silent. She spent her evenings at the lake, the same spot where her grandmother once stood beside Elena in that faded photograph. She imagined her, the defiant scholar who had followed the trail from Berlin to the Alps to Argentina, who had risked everything to reveal the truth. One evening, as the sun sank behind the mountains, Anna noticed something glinting near the waterline. She knelt and brushed aside the sand. A single gold coin, engraved with the same eagle and WWII that had appeared on Elena's final letter. She held it tightly, her reflection shimmering on its surface. Somewhere deep inside, she felt a quiet certainty that Elena had never truly disappeared, that her spirit lingered here, among the mountains, guarding the truth she had fought so hard to uncover. The treasure, in the end, was not the gold itself. It was the story. The unbroken chain of people who refused to let lies become history. And as the last light faded from the lake, Anna whispered softly into the cold alpine air, her voice carrying across the still water, "You found it, Elena! The truth lives now. Months after the Grundlsee discovery, the quiet valley that had slept for decades transformed into a hub of global attention. News crews, historians, and government representatives descended upon the small Austrian town. Security forces cordoned off the excavation site, and the vault chamber beneath the mountain was sealed behind reinforced steel doors. The crates of treasure were transported under military escort to Vienna, where an international commission began cataloging the contents. Each item told a story. A gold pocket watch engraved with Hebrew initials traced back to a family in Warsaw that vanished in 1943. A painting by Gustav Klimt, once displayed in a Viennese gallery, had been missing since Nazi officials confiscated it during the occupation. Dozens of small jewelry pieces were identified through family records. Wedding rings, pendants, brooches. Fragments of ordinary lives stolen during extraordinary cruelty. The world watched as restitution efforts began. The process was painfully slow, tangled in bureaucracy and legal disputes, but for the families who had waited generations, even a single returned heirloom meant closure. Survivors and descendants gathered at memorial events where art pieces were unveiled one by one, their histories read aloud like prayers. In those moments, the gold that once symbolized greed and war became something else. Evidence of remembrance. Anna Keller was invited to Vienna to join the commission as an archivist. She worked quietly, spending her days analyzing documents recovered from the vault. The ledgers confirmed what Elena Weiss had written in her letter. The Nazi treasure networks were vast, and the Grundlsee cache was only a fragment of the larger system. Dozens of shipments were never found, their contents lost, destroyed, or quietly absorbed into post-war economies. Some trails ended in neutral countries, others vanished behind classified intelligence records. Yet Anna was not chasing the remaining gold. She was searching for understanding. She wanted to complete Elena's work. Not to expose governments or rewrite history, but to humanize it. Each time she uncovered a name, a date, or a note written in pencil by a frightened curator forced to hand over museum collections, she felt closer to Elena, as if walking in her shadow through time. One evening, after weeks of sorting through the ledgers, she found something unusual, a page torn halfway through, written in Elena's unmistakable handwriting. It listed 4 items marked with a symbol, an encircled raven, and a final note. Transferred to Convoy South. Destination unknown. Final witness, Lieutenant J. Schneider, March 1945. Anna felt a chill. The raven mark matched a small symbol carved discreetly on one of the crates at Grundlsee, a mark she had noticed but dismissed. She traced the ink with her finger, realizing it wasn't just a reference note. It was a clue. Over the following months, Anna quietly followed the trail through archives and military transport logs. Her search led her from Vienna to Switzerland, where she discovered evidence of a secret convoy that crossed into northern Italy during the final days of the war. Records hinted that a portion of the Reichsbank's gold reserves had been loaded onto trucks bound for Lake Como, the same region where Mussolini was captured and executed in April 1945. The official story claimed the convoy was intercepted by partisans and the treasure seized, but no confirmed evidence ever surfaced. Local legends spoke of trucks sinking beneath the lake or being hidden in tunnels near Dongo. For decades, divers had searched the depths, finding nothing but rusted metal. Anna realized that Elena had followed this same path in the 1950s. Her disappearance in South America may not have been an escape, but part of her investigation. Perhaps she had gone to trace where the last gold ended up, not for profit, but for truth. In 2025, nearly 2 years after the Grundlsee discovery, Anna stood on the banks of Lake Como under a gray Italian sky. She carried a worn notebook, Elena's ledger, and placed it beside a small memorial dedicated to those who had died in the war's final days. The water was calm, reflecting the snow-capped peaks beyond. She opened the ledger one last time and looked at the last page Elena had written. Truth, like gold, must be purified by fire before it shines. Anna smiled faintly. She closed the book, wrapped it in plastic, and gently placed it beneath a stone at the memorial's base. Some stories, she thought, are not meant to be finished, only remembered. As she turned to leave, an old fisherman sitting nearby called out to her in Italian, asking if she was a historian. When she nodded, he chuckled softly. "Then maybe you'll appreciate this," he said, pulling something from his coat pocket. A dull, corroded coin. Its edges were faintly engraved with an eagle and the letters V07. Anna stared in disbelief. The same mark that had haunted her research. The same coin design she had found at Grundlsee. The fisherman smiled. "They say the lake still keeps its secrets," he said. "But sometimes it gives them back." She accepted the coin, feeling its weight in her palm. Somewhere in that moment, she understood. The treasure wasn't lost. Not really. It lived on in memory. In the stories of those who refused to let history bury its truth. As the sun broke through the clouds, casting gold ripples across the lake's surface, Anna looked out over the water one last time and whispered, "Rest now, Elena. The world remembers." The years passed quietly after that day at Lake Como. The world moved on, headlines faded, and the frenzy surrounding the Nazi gold dwindled into academic papers and cautious documentaries. But for Anna Keller, the story never truly ended. She carried the weight of those lost names and unclaimed artifacts wherever she went, the kind of burden only history itself can leave behind. She returned to Berlin, taking a position at the German Historical Archive. Her office overlooked the rebuilt city, a metropolis that wore its past like scars beneath polished glass. Each morning, she would walk through the corridors lined with shelves of old records and crumbling photographs. The smell of aging paper reminded her that time may heal, but it never forgets. One autumn morning, a letter arrived. The envelope was yellowed, its ink faded, and the handwriting instantly familiar. It was Elena Weiss's. The letter had been found during restoration work in Buenos Aires, hidden inside a hollowed-out book at a defunct embassy building. The Argentine archivists had traced the name on the envelope and contacted the German embassy, who then forwarded it to Anna. Hands trembling, Anna opened it carefully. Inside were just a few lines, written in Elena's flowing hand. "If you are reading this, then history has found its voice again. Remember that not all gold was stolen, and not all that was stolen was lost. Seek the name Sutherland. The truth lies not beneath the earth, but among the living." Anna sat still, rereading the words until they blurred. Sutherland, it was not a place, but a name. She began searching archives, tracing it through post-war records. Eventually, she found a lead. A Hans Sutherland, an Austrian engineer who had worked for the Reichsbank during the war and later disappeared in 1947. Digging deeper, she discovered he had been involved in constructing secure vaults, not only in Germany, but across the Alps. One of his last known projects had been near the Swiss border, disguised as a hydropower tunnel. Records suggested that in early April 1945, Sutherland had overseen the sealing of a special storage site under the WWII. Pretext of preventing Allied bombing? Damage. Anna's instincts told her this was it, the final. Missing vault. She traveled to the location, an isolated valley between Austria and Switzerland, where an abandoned tunnel bore the marks of wartime engineering. The entrance was half buried under decades of rockfall and moss. With the help of a local historian and a small excavation crew, she managed to enter. Inside, the air was cold and heavy with silence. Rusted rails ran along the floor, leading deeper into the mountain. After hours of careful exploration, they found it. A sealed chamber, the steel door intact, but the hinges corroded. When they finally broke through, the beam of Anna's flashlight illuminated rows of crates, identical to those from Grundlesea. But this time, something was different. Many were already open, their contents missing. On the wall, painted faintly in black, was a single raven within a circle, the same mark Elena had noted in her ledger. Beneath it, someone had written in German, "Not for war, but for rebirth." Inside one of the remaining crates, Anna found no gold, no jewels, just stacks of carefully wrapped manuscripts, sketches, and research notes. They were documents related to scientific and cultural projects suppressed by the Nazi regime. Studies in art restoration, physics, and medical ethics that had been hidden away when the war turned dark. It dawned on her that Elena and Sutherland may have worked together. Perhaps this final vault wasn't meant to hoard stolen gold. It was meant to preserve knowledge the war had nearly destroyed. Among the papers, Anna discovered a final note in Elena's handwriting. If gold represents what mankind loses in greed, then knowledge represents what it can still save. She stood there for a long time, surrounded by the relics of a vanished world, and felt an overwhelming sense of peace. The treasure, she realized, had never truly been lost. It had only changed form. Months later, the recovered manuscripts were displayed in a global exhibition titled Recovered Light, The Lost Knowledge of War. It drew millions of visitors from around the world. Students, veterans, and historians all stood before the glass cases, reading the fragile pages that had survived the darkness. Anna watched from a distance as people whispered in awe. She understood now what Elena had meant. That some treasures are not measured in gold bars or jewels, but in what they teach us about who we are, and what we must never become again. That night, as she left the museum, she paused outside and looked up at the stars. They shimmered faintly above the city. The same stars that had watched Europe burn 8 decades ago, and the same that now watched it heal. She whispered softly into the cool night air, as though Elena could still hear her across time and memory. The treasure was never lost. It was waiting for us to understand it. And then she walked away, the echo of the past following her not as a burden, but as a guide.